Coming up on New Day at Arirang, South Korea set to take delivery of tens of thousands of doses of Pfizer's new antiviral drug in the coming hours. More will follow in the months to come. Health authorities projecting another day with around 4,000 new cases of COVID-19. The U.S. designates 6 North Korean individuals related to North Korea's weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs. Washington says they are responsible for illegally procuring goods for weapons. Plus, bad news for Biden. Inflation in the United States in 2021 was the highest since 1982, with December consumer prices up a whopping 7% from a year earlier.
Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on January 13th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
And I'm Mark Broom. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll be taking a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world. We start, though, with the COVID-19 situation here. South Korea is expected to report more than 4,000 new infections again on this Thursday.
But on a positive note, the nation's very first shipment of COVID-19 pills are set to arrive in the country in a couple of hours. For more on this and other updates is our reporter Choi Min-jung here in the studio with us. Good morning, Min-jung.
Good morning.
Let's start with a local situation. How many cases are we expecting today?
Again, we're expecting the daily tally to hover around the 4,000 mark once again. From midnight to 9 p.m. on Wednesday, South Korea reported around 3,400 cases. This is a drop of around 300 cases from the same time yesterday, and it's around the same range as last week, but compared to 2 weeks ago, the figure is down by more than 1,000 cases. Amid the declining number of cases, health authorities met on Wednesday to discuss whether social distancing should be extended. Watchers are saying there's a possibility that it will be extended for more than 2 weeks, with the Korean Lunar New Year holiday coming in early February. And given the situation with the Omicron variant, authorities reportedly believe that the current measures should not be totally lifted just yet. Experts are predicting that by February, the country's daily tally will hit over 20,000 with the rapid spread of Omicron.
Well, for now at least, local infections are going down. Maybe in the future with Omicron, it could sharply go back up again. But in terms of imported cases right now, there is an issue there because scores of people returning to South Korea from the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas have Omicron.
That's right, Mark. Around 70 people who attended the CES last week were confirmed to have COVID-19. Considering the number of people expected to enter the country and with investigations still underway, authorities say the number of CES-related cases is highly likely to increase. Officials stress that those returning from the event must comply with self-quarantine rules upon arrival, and they also advise people who are exempt from quarantine for important business purposes to extend the number of days working from home after arrival from the current 3 to 10 days. On top of this, authorities are on high alert over the record-breaking number of imported cases. The country confirmed an all-time high of 381 cases from overseas on Wednesday, and recent data is showing that 88% of imported cases are Omicron. Now, all travelers arriving in Korea until February 3rd must undergo a 10-day quarantine. But given the current situation, authorities say the quarantine is highly likely to be extended.
Well, that's certainly concerning, but let's turn more to the brighter note. We hear that new COVID-19 oral treatments are set to arrive today. Tell us more on that.
That's right, Mo-gyan. Pfizer's oral pills Paxlovid will be arriving at Incheon Airport today at noon. The first shipment will be enough to cover around 21,000 people, and we're expecting another 10,000 courses to arrive by the end of this month. This is all part of the 76,000 courses the government purchased from Pfizer, and once the first batch arrives, it will be distributed nationwide to be administered as early as Friday. Now, because we're only receiving a partial consignment, priority will be given to seniors aged 65 and over and those with weak immune systems who are being treated at home and at residential treatment centers. Authorities say that the 31,000 doses for January will be more than enough to cover this priority group, as they are expected to administer the treatment to less than 1,000 people a day. Clinical trials show that the treatment was 88% effective in reducing hospitalizations and deaths, so the pills are expected to help reduce the number of elderly people that become severely ill after contracting the virus, as 8 to 9% of that age group get critically ill after infection. And because the pills are made to stop the virus from replicating inside the body, officials are expecting them to be effective against variants like Omicron as well.
Now, on the vaccine front, another vaccine was approved by South Korean health authorities on Wednesday.
That's right, Mark. South Korea granted approval for vaccines developed by U.S. drug maker Novovax. The vaccine has become the fifth to be given the green light by the country's drug agency after those developed by AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Janssen, and Moderna. The vaccine has shown to be around 90% effective in clinical trials, and because it uses a more conventional technology compared to mRNA vaccines, watchers say there are fewer concerns about side effects. Authorities are planning to offer the vaccine to those who are yet to be vaccinated, possibly starting in February. And the vaccine is expected to become a new option for people who are hesitant about getting vaccinated due to fears over side effects.
All right, Min-jung, as always, thank you so much for your report. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Omicron is slamming the world hard right now, with almost all continents seeing huge surges in new cases. According to the World Health Organization, the tally from last week was an all-time high.
Yes, countries like the U.S. and U.K. continue to struggle, while Israel decided that lockdowns won't protect its citizens against the new strain. Jin has this report.
Last week's global COVID-19 tally topped 15 million, the highest recorded weekly tally so far. This according to the World Health Organization on Wednesday for the week ending January 9th. This is also a jump of 55% from the week before. Despite the sharp rise in cases, the death toll only rose by 3% as Omicron poses less threat to patients' health.
Let's be clear. While Omicron causes less severe disease than Delta, it remains a dangerous virus, particularly for those who are unvaccinated. Almost 50,000 deaths a week is 50,000 deaths too many. Learning to live with this virus does not mean we can or should accept this number of deaths.
The U.S. reported the highest number of cases with 4.6 million new infections for the week, a 73% increase from the week before. With this, the number of hospitalizations due to COVID-19 rose on Tuesday, breaking the record with more than 150,000. France came in second on the list, followed by UK, then Italy. While fewer cases, Germany also hit a record high for the daily tally with more than 80,000. The country's parliament is now pushing for a vaccine mandate as it assumes infections will only speed up.
But I believe it's necessary, and I will repeat what I've just said. The decision not to get vaccinated is not just a decision for oneself, but for 80 million other people, and we're seeing this in light of the coronavirus pandemic.
Another country hit harshly by Omicron was Israel, and with domestic transmission surging and Prime Minister Naftali Bennett forecasting between 2 million and 4 million infections in the weeks ahead, the country concluded that travel restrictions would do little other than harm the economy. Bennett said Tuesday that Israel is following 3 guiding principles: keep our economy open, protect the most vulnerable folks in society, the elders, and to take care of our children. Jin, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. We've just entered 2022, and for many countries, it's been around 2 years of lockdowns, restrictions, variants, and vaccines. COVID-19 was a global pandemic that very few people, if anyone, saw coming, and a pandemic that countries continues to impact almost every facet of our daily lives.
Naturally, as we start a new year, people are asking themselves, what can you expect over the next 12 months? For more, we are joined by Ben Cowling, Chair Professor of Epidemiology at the University of Hong Kong. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
So we're just 2 years into this pandemic. 2020 was terrible. 2021, slightly better. Now in 2022, where do you think we stand? And what can we take as the main positives and potential negatives going forward?
I'm very optimistic about 2022 in the sense that I think this is going to mark the end of the pandemic at some point this year for most countries in the world. I think a lot of places still have to face an Omicron wave, but as we've seen in South Africa, in some parts of Europe, there's a lot of infections, but not necessarily a lot of severe disease. And I think once the infections have passed, once those waves have come to an end, I think a lot of countries are going to look to return to normal. The one thing I would like to watch out for, though, is changes in the virus. Again, if there's a new variant, then of course we may have to rethink. But if things stay as they are, if we can get over the Omicron waves, then I think there's a really good chance that we'll be able to say it's the end of the pandemic at some point this year.
Okay, talking about rethinking things, some experts are calling for a shake-up of the way we deal with this pandemic. Some saying that the booster shots should go up to 3 and the remainder, the 4th, 5th shots left for the most vulnerable members of society. Do you think strategies should be tweaked somewhat now, 2 years into this pandemic? And would you agree with the opinion that COVID-19 is now endemic?
Certainly, I don't think the virus is going to go away. I think the virus is going to be with us for a long time. It may change, of course, but it's not going to disappear. So I think that in the future, we may all have a chance to get more vaccine doses, 3rd dose, 4th dose, 5th dose at some point in the future. But I think now's not the time for 4th doses. I think we'll leave those for now. In Korea, I know you've got almost 40%, even more than 40% of people who have had their booster dose, which is fantastic. And I think you're in a really good position to face an upcoming Omicron wave. You've probably got a better level of immunity than most other places in the world. So I think in the future, a lot more things are going to be left up to individual decisions rather than having policies in place. For example, for travelers, maybe we won't have vaccine passports anymore.
Now, Professor, just a few days ago, the World Health Organization kind of forecast that more than half of the people in Europe will catch Omicron over the next 2 months or so. Considering Omicron is widely considered far less severe than, previous strains, will this necessarily be a bad thing?
I think it will be a bad thing. And I think that there'll be a lot of countries in Europe are going to look to flatten the curve, to slow things down. But at the same time, I don't think there's any good reason to now try to buy time, because we got vaccines available. People could choose to get vaccinated. It wouldn't make sense to me to try to stop transmission and hold it back for another 3 months or 6 months. I think Omicron waves will occur across Europe, but if they can be slowed down, if the curves can be flattened, I think it'll make a difference, because there are still plenty of unvaccinated people who are going to be particularly vulnerable to severe COVID, even with Omicron.
And finally, as we just heard from our reporter before, on Wednesday, South Korea approved use of the Novovax vaccine. Now, unlike Pfizer or Moderna, it's not an mRNA vaccine. It actually uses part of the virus to trigger an immune response. I just want to ask you, I know you're a professor, an expert, but in layman's terms, what is the difference between those two different types of vaccines?
Got it. So the virus has proteins which are the components of the virus, including the spike protein on the surface of the virus. And it's that spike protein which lets the virus get into our cells, infect them, and then allow it to reproduce. The spike protein is a critical component of the virus. The Novavax vaccine is a vaccine which includes lots and lots and lots of spike proteins that they've made using a special manufacturing process. So they inject you with essentially lots of spike proteins of the virus. It won't reproduce because it's not the whole virus, it's only part of it. But it's a very pure vaccine. It has very low level of side effects. It's really a great idea. In contrast, the Pfizer vaccine, the mRNA vaccines, you inject into our body the recipe to make spike proteins, which is like one additional step. So then we end up inside our cells making spike proteins, which then our body can react to. So the Novavax vaccine is like taking one step out of that vaccine. And the way that it's made, it's a really clever design. It's a very pure vaccine. So I think it's it's fantastic that you have that vaccine available in Korea now.
And just one more thing before I let you go then. Do you have a preference between the two, the mRNA or the Novavax?
Well, for myself, if I could get Novavax, I think I would actually choose the Novavax vaccine because it's going to have a very similar level of effect to the mRNA vaccines. In terms of the immune concept, it's very, very similar. But because of the way it's made, it's a purer vaccine. It will have less side effects, less immediate reactions, less fever, less achy arm, and also maybe in the rarer cases, less occurrence of more serious side effects. So I think it's a fantastic vaccine.
All right, Professor, thank you so much, as always, for your insights. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, in response to North Korea's latest ballistic missile tests, the Biden administration has blacklisted 6 North Korean individuals for engaging in the development of the regime's weapons programs. Kim Hyo-san has this story.
The U.S. is imposing sanctions on North Korea in response to the regime's latest ballistic missile tests. The Treasury Department said Wednesday that it's designating 5 North Korean individuals for their work in the development of weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile-related programs for the regime. It explained that one is based in Russia while the others are in China. The statement stressed the measures are in line with the Biden administration's efforts to prevent the advancement of Pyongyang's WMD and ballistic missile programs. It adds they also come as the regime has carried out 6 ballistic missile launches since September 2021, violating multiple UN Security Council resolutions. The State Department has also designated an additional North Korean individual based in Russia, along with a Russian entity for a similar reason. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said the sanctions are aimed at constraining the North's weapons programs. The sanctions freeze any U.S.-related assets of those targeted and prohibit all dealings with them. These are the Biden administration's first sanctions to specifically target Pyongyang's weapons programs. However, the U.S. says it still wants to hold talks with the North and persuade it to give up its nuclear and missiles programs. Kim Hyo-san, Arirang News.
The U.S. Consumer Price Index surged a whopping 7% on year in December. That's the biggest rise in nearly 4 decades. According to the Labor Department, Wednesday, consumer prices jumped 0.5% last month compared to November. The gain exceeded the 0.4% forecast of economists polled by the Wall Street Journal. It indicates that high inflation is likely to persist in the U.S. well into the year. The report said the increase was driven by price spikes for rental accommodation, used cars, and food. South Korea's export prices in 2021 rose on year to a roughly 12-year high. The Bank of Korea says the country's overall export prices rose 14.3% compared to the previous year. The central bank attributed it to rising global oil and raw material prices and the low base effect from 2020. However, export prices in December fell for the second month in a row. The related index was down 1% to 114.6. The decline was mainly due to the lower prices of coal and petroleum products.
And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for Global Insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It is indeed time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. Well, made of tiny blocks of silicon, cobalt and copper, semiconductors power almost every electronic device in the modern world, from electric toothbrushes and smartphones to driverless cars and military weapons. As tensions between the United States and China intensifies, Washington has been seeking to forge a network of like-minded partners to cooperate on the latest technologies and, of course, cut Beijing out of its semiconductor supply chain. But first, it has to gain a strong advantage in chip technology and work with Asia's largest chip makers, TSMC and Samsung, which currently dominate the global market. We take a look at what the growing battle for chip supremacy means for this part of the world. And for this, we connect with Darryl West, Vice President of Governance Studies and Senior Fellow of the Centre for Tech Innovation at the Brookings Institution. Very warm welcome to you, Dr. West. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be with you.
Well, thank you again. And well, first of all, for our viewers who might not be so familiar with the issue, what is the importance of having superior semiconductor technology? A lot of nations are rushing to just develop the next generation chips. And well, what is the significance of this, especially in the context of the U.S. China rivalry?
I mean, the chips are important for trade, commerce, security, and innovation. As your introduction suggested, advanced semiconductors are used in virtually all electronic products. They're used in many different sectors. I think in Korea, 1/3 of your exports come in the form of semiconductors. So obviously, it's very important for your economy. In the United States, it's critical for our efforts at technology innovation. Virtually every advanced technology in terms of AI and data analytics rely on chips in some sense. So the China angle is important from a security standpoint. Obviously, there's a lot of concern in the United States about security vis-a-vis China. And so that's an aspect that everybody in Washington, D.C. is keeping a close eye on.
And now, of course, we're seeing rising tensions near the South China Sea and along the Taiwan Strait. And while there are worries in Washington that Beijing might gain control of Taiwan's massive semiconductor capacity, how real would you say these concerns are? And what would be the ramifications should they occur?
Well, if that happened, the ramifications would be quite severe because, as you suggest, most of the semiconductors come either from Taiwan or South Korea. And so if there were problems with the supply coming from either of those areas, it would create enormous difficulties in the United States, the European Union, and other places around the world. So the whole geopolitical situation in that part of the world has grown very complicated. There's been a lot of tension, even with the arrival of a new Biden administration in the United States. There still is a lot of concern about the U.S. China relationship.
Well, undoubtedly, the US leads the world in nearly all areas of high tech. But when it comes to semiconductors, though, a lot of companies have decided to go fabless. And it's said that the US lost its semiconductor manufacturing to Taiwan and South Korea decades ago. Well, how does America then intend to ramp up its capacity and regain that competitive advantage?
I mean, there's a lot of interest in the United States in what we call onshoring, kind of boosting our domestic capabilities in a lot of different critical areas, and semiconductors certainly would fall within that area. So there is legislation pending in the United States before Congress that would invest up to $50 billion in building new fab manufacturing facilities in the United States. There's just concern that so much of the world's dependence falls on two countries that I think there's interest both in Europe as well as in the United States in boosting domestic capability just so that we are less reliant on other countries.
And well, in the US, President Biden introduced the so-called CHIPS Act, which aims to really ramp up domestic production, also create jobs, and overall just expand America's capacity and technological ability to produce the next generation chips. But, well, there are some critics, though, saying that these businesses don't need all that support and taxpayers' money because it is in their interest to pursue innovation and secure supply chain networks anyway. So what is your view on this, Dr. West?
I mean, businesses certainly are interested in pursuing innovation, but what we've seen over the last few decades is a very heavy corporate reliance on outsourcing. So big parts of the global supply chain have gone outside the United States. A lot of the manufacturing capabilities have gone to various places in Asia. And of course, during the pandemic, we saw some of the problems with that. So now there's an interest in the government playing a role. Part of that legislation that you cite would increase public investment in building fab manufacturing facilities within the United States, and then also giving private companies incentive to invest their own dollars in manufacturing capabilities. So part of that legislation would create investment tax credits as an incentive. So we do feel that companies need to be encouraged to reshore jobs back in the United States in these critical areas, and semiconductors clearly is one of the most important for a variety of different sectors.
And while the likes of Samsung and TSMC, they've been quite enthusiastic about expanding production in the US. And they're going to be working with US companies too, like Intel. So they're going to be cooperating to an extent. But at the same time, these companies, they are fierce rivals. So they're also going to be competing with each other. How do you expect this collaboration and rivalry to play out?
I mean, the good news is we actually need both companies, and we need good relations with both of those countries as well, because both are absolutely crucial for semiconductors and therefore very important for our efforts at technology innovation. As you mentioned earlier, the United States does extremely well on technology innovation, and it's really central to the new economy that is emerging. But obviously, we want to maintain our strong lead in that area. We see the United States having many competitive advantages. So it's very important for the United States to maintain good relations both with Taiwan as well as Korea.
Some are concerned that as multiple countries, including the United States and South Korea, of course, and even those in the European Union, intending to become self-reliant in chip technology and really ramping up their domestic production, do you possibly see greater protectionism or possible trade conflicts arising over this?
Well, the United States and Europe are interested in boosting our domestic capabilities, but it takes up to 10 years to build these really sophisticated manufacturing capabilities in the semiconductor area. So there's no risk of anything happening in the short run that would create problems for Korean companies. At least for the next 5, if not 10 years, we're going to need those chips, and so therefore that trade relationship is going to be very important. It may be 10 years down the road, the U.S. will have a stronger manufacturing capability, but that is a very long-term goal. It takes a long time to build those types of capabilities.
Well, for now, the United States and South Korea are facing supply chain issues, and they've together agreed to ramp up cooperation on semiconductor technology, making sure there's enough being produced and also enough going around. And while they've even set up a hotline for regular communication to make sure that the supply chain is resilient. But in other ways, how do you see the two sides working together on semiconductors?
I think they will continue to work together very closely, just because semiconductors are so crucial to our entire digital economy that is growing as a proportion of the overall economy. COVID, in fact, has accelerated technology innovation. People in the United States had to shift to online learning, telemedicine, remote work, and e-commerce. So all those platforms have grown quite substantially over the last 2 years. Even if COVID gets under control this year, those advances are still going to be there. So the United States needs a strong semiconductor sector. We need good relations with Korea, because that is very central, both from an economic standpoint as well as a security standpoint.
And of course, Washington's been emphasizing the importance of working together with like-minded countries here in the Indo-Pacific. And at the moment, it seems Taiwan's TSMC, they've been forging closer cooperation with US and Japanese companies. And that's been slightly worrying for South Korea's Samsung. And amid Seoul and Tokyo's diplomatic feud that started in 2019, it's been no secret that Japan would prefer not to have South Korea as involved in Quad Plus or the CPTPP or other regional initiatives. Although South Korea has admittedly wavered when it comes to choosing between Washington and Beijing, and not aligned itself as strongly as Japan and Taiwan might have done with the US, do you think the country is being sidelined here?
Not at all. The United States needs a strong relationship with South Korea. I don't see anything happening in the next few years that's going to change that. That relationship is vital for U.S. economic development. It's definitely vital in terms of security. There are many new military and defense applications in AI, machine learning, and data analytics that depend on semiconductors. So the United States needs to maintain that close relationship, and I would be shocked if there was anything different that happened in that area.
And well, as the US sets out to build this network of like-minded countries that will cooperate in areas of emerging technologies, not just semiconductors, of course, but also AI and 6G. There seems to be a lot of those buzzwords there, but at the same time, it's all very broad at the moment. How do you think such cooperation should look like? I mean, what are the kind of goals or areas that they should really narrow down and focus on?
I mean, I think there will be many areas of cooperation in all the new technologies that you're talking about. The United States very much wants strong relationship with countries that share our values, and that includes values of democracy and freedom and liberty. And so, President Biden is working very closely to rebuild relationships with European allies, but also countries such as Japan and South Korea. We need to basically come to agreements on trade, on economic competitiveness, on innovation, and on security issues. And certainly, everybody's keeping a very close eye on China and its emerging power. And so that's the reason Biden is very focused both on countering that threat, but also having very strong relationships with our traditional allies.
Well, it seems that many countries in the West, also here in the Indo-Pacific, including South Korea, now seem to sense that perhaps it's not going to be beneficial in the long run to have such close technological or trade ties with China. And well, despite this deepening divide between US allies and China, trade with Beijing hasn't exactly shrunk. And even Washington's staunchest allies like Japan, they're still doing business with Beijing. Do you think decoupling is really possible, and will Mr. Biden continue to pursue this?
I don't think we're going to see decoupling in the next few years because it takes years to set up manufacturing capabilities. These global supply chains have been in place for a number of years. We can't just kind of shift them overnight. It really takes a number of years to develop new global supply chains, new suppliers, new manufacturing facilities, and new distribution facilities. So I think that's one of the reasons why trade with China has actually stayed at a rather high level. That in the short run, you can't really change those types of relationships. It really takes a long time to do that. So over the course of, let's say, the next 5 years, that may start to change. But there certainly is not going to be decoupling in the next 1, 2, or 3 years, just because it takes a long time to rebuild new kinds of relationships.
Well, now it's almost been 1 year since Mr. Biden took office. And well, many were expecting him to reverse a lot of Mr. Trump's trade policies. At least that's what we were hoping for here in the Indo-Pacific, I suppose. But we didn't see many trade initiatives from Mr. Biden over the past year. And it's been made quite clear that Washington won't be joining the CPTPP. Do you think the US is going to create its own trade networks or groupings in the Indo-Pacific?
I mean, you're right that Biden has not really emphasized new trade relationships. There have been some bilateral things, but it's very complicated politically within the United States because trade is such a hot button, because trade conveys the loss of U.S. manufacturing jobs, growing dependence on foreign suppliers of goods and services. And so, all of the political arguments that former President Trump made about trade and dependence on foreign suppliers, that is still part of American public opinion. So Biden has actually been surprisingly cautious on those fronts. As you point out, he hasn't really made radical changes in those areas, in part because the politics are complicated. Trade is still a controversial topic within the United States. And of course, there's always the possibility of a Biden-Trump rematch in the 2024 presidential election. And so I think Biden will move forward very cautiously in this area.
I see. Well, that was Darrell West, Vice President of Government Studies and Senior Fellow of the Center for Tech Innovation at the Brookings Institution. It was wonderful and fascinating to speak with you, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
From the classroom to the campaign trail, with 18-year-olds now legally allowed to run for public office, with the exception of the top office. Due to a revision to the law, some students just out of high school have been out campaigning for their favorite presidential candidates. Our Kim Do-yeon had the opportunity to speak with two friends who are campaigning for opposite parties to see how their lives have changed.
Among them, a bill that includes lowering the election age, allowing even some high schoolers to run for office in the National Assembly.
Lowering the age at which people can run for local elections.
국민의힘 고3과 민주당 고3은 모두 우열의 가치를 따질 수 없는 성숙한 민주사회의 구성원입니다. 지지하는 정당은 다르나 국가와 국민을 향한 마음은 항상 같습니다.
윤석열 정부는 지금까지 볼 수 없었던 새로운 불협화음을 낼 것입니다. 우리에게는 한없이 엄격한 잣대를 들이밀 것입니다. 그들의 잘못은 따끔히 지적하되 다시 그들을 품어주는 통합의 기치를 보일 것입니다.
The two powerful speeches you just heard were from 18-year-olds, who, by the way, will be voting in a presidential election for the first time this March. What are they looking for this election? Let's join them in a Zoom meeting to hear more. Lee Jung-in, who has been supporting the ruling Democratic Party for years, came under the spotlight in December following a press briefing at National Assembly. He criticized the chairman of the People Power Party, Lee Jun-seok, for comparing the quality of speeches delivered by the 18-year-olds in both parties. The youngster fired back, saying these are the kind of statements that further polarize the country.
저는 처음부터 정치를 해야겠다 이런 생각에서 정치 활동에 뛰어든 건 아니었고요. 제가 다니는 학교에는 좀 선생님들에 의한 그런 체벌들이 좀 있었고요. 저도 물론 예외는 아니었습니다. 그래서 그런 경험에서 시작돼서 사실은 제일 먼저 시작했던 건 청소년 인권 보호 운동이었습니다. 그냥 단순하게 학교에서 맞기 싫어서 처음에는 그런 활동으로 시작을 했었고요. 근데 이후에 이제 우리 박근혜 전 대통령의 탄핵 정국이 있었고 또 이 과정에서 뭔가 사회의 변화를 위해서 노력해봐야겠고 참여해봐야겠다라는 생각이 좀 많이 들었던 것 같습니다.
Kim Min-gyu, a powerful young figure for the main opposition People Power Party, came under the spotlight when he delivered a speech at the launch of the party's presidential election committee in early December. Using the theme Dissonance, a popular song especially among younger people, he called for national unity despite the differences among individuals.
작년 6월에 국민의힘에서 당대표 선거 이후에 중앙당의 대변인을 토론 배틀로 공개 선발하겠다라는 공약을 내걸었습니다. 그런 당의 어떻게 보면 요직을 전 국민을 대상으로 개방하겠다는 그 단순한 메시지. 능력과 실력만 있다면 나이나 직업에 구애받지 않고 당직을 놓고 경쟁할 수 있는 그 시스템에 매료되었고요. 그리고 결정적으로 최근 청년층 사이에서 화두라고 보일 수 있는 시대 정신인 공정이나 정의와 같은 그런 시대 정신에 매료되어서 토론 배틀에 참여해서 처음 정치권에 발을 담그게 됐습니다.
What are some key issues that your supporting candidates tackle, in your opinion, to win younger votes?
지금 이재명 후보가 또 내놓은 청년 정책들을 봤을 때 청년 기본주택이나 아니면은 청년 기본대출 시리즈도 있고요. 아직 정책으로는 마련되진 않았는데 얼마 전에 탈모 정책 관련해서 여러 제안을 하신 것도 있습니다. 그런 정책들을 봤을 때 국민을 조금 더 닮은 후보, 이재명 후보가 제가 더 선택을 하는 데 있어서 좀 더 앞선 평가 기준이라고 볼 수 있겠습니다.
만 18세라는 제 나이대에서 가장 신음하는 부분이라고 한다면 갈등일 겁니다. 우리가 흔히 얘기하는 젠더 갈등이라든지 아니면 이번에 새롭게 경선 과정이나 여러 가지 선거 과정에서 부각된 세대 갈등이라든지 그런 것들을 몸소 체험하는 세대가 이 세대일 텐데 저는 갈등을 좀 회피하는 것이 아니라
Kim is still waiting for his high school graduation, while Lee just graduated a week ago. People know about the two's involvement in politics, but how have their classmates responded to their right to vote? And what are they looking for in this election?
보통 우리가 대선이라는 국면에서 후보자를 평가할 때 심도 깊은 정책 검증이라든가 아니면 그 후보자라는 인물에 대한 총체적인 평가를 논하지는 않는 것 같고요. 오히려 그 후보가 내는 언행이나 그 정당이 내는 메시지에 따라서
This claim signifies that the 18-year-olds are up for grabs, unlike some older voters who stay loyal to one particular party rather than a candidate. That would be around 500,000 eligible voters in the country. During the last national election, when 18-year-olds first obtained the right to vote, there was a participation rate of 2/3, the highest among those aged 40 or younger, meaning it's an influential demographic.
다 우리가 정치하면 떠올리는 게 아까 민규 친구 얘기했던 것처럼 흰머리 잔뜩 난 아저씨들이 넥타이 메고 앉아가지고 이렇게 뭐 같이 막 언쟁하고 말싸움하고 이런 것만 생각하시는데 사실 정치는 그런 사람들만의 영역은 아니거든요. 모두가 참여할 수 있고 그다음에 딱 우리가 정말 계급, 성별, 뭐 계층, 뭐 아무 나이 상관없이
Just in time, a series of bills have been passed to accommodate young people. Just last month, the minimum age to be elected into the National Assembly or local district offices was reduced to just 18, down from 25. In addition, the minimum age required to officially register to a party came down from 18 to 16. The national spotlight on Lee and Kim in particular perhaps symbolizes the country's inclusion of the younger generation in politics. Do you ever feel the pressure from the national attention you get being just an 18-year-old? Or better yet, aren't your parents worried?
저희 신념이나 가치관을 통해서 나오는 거고 누군가가 부모님이 뭐 지시한다고 아니면은 다른 데서 동요한다고 움직일 수 있는 그런 가치는 아니라고 생각합니다.
Being the same age, the two overcame their differing political views and are now friends.
저희는 10대에 처음 만난 사이이기 때문에 좀 각별하기도 하고요. 뭐 정인이가 둘이 뭐 같이 방송 있는 날에는 저 태워준다고 집 앞으로 데리러 오기도 하고 제가 그러면은 뭐 방송 있으면 방송 하나 물어다 주기도 하고 그러면서 친해진 친구고요. 그래서 제가 참 고마운 점도 많고 배울 점도 많은 친구입니다.
여러 언론사에서 지금 이 두 명을 대상으로 좀 여러 차례 불러주고 계셔서 사실 뭐 당은 다르나 이게 당이기 전에 사실 사람들이잖아요. 그렇기 때문에 좀 과한 질문으로.
While they do seem to be living a different life compared to other 18-year-olds who just graduated high school, they too are facing the same issues. Lee has decided to pursue a degree in public administration, while Kim is considering to take some time off before deciding what he wants to do next. Regardless, the two have long and bright futures ahead of them, but for the next 50 days or so, they will be kept very busy. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The South Korean Netflix hit series Squid Game has made history again, becoming the first foreign language TV show to be nominated for a Screen Actors Guild Award, but not just one, 4. The show is in the running for Outstanding Performance by a Male Actor with Lee Jung-jae, Outstanding Performance by a Female Actor for Jung Ho-yeon, and Outstanding Performance by an Ensemble Series and Best Stunt Ensemble in a TV Series. In 2021, Squid Game broke Netflix's record as the most watched series on the platform.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. At least 10 people are dead after a car bomb exploded on a road leading to the airport in the Somali capital of Mogadishu on Wednesday. Officials say among those killed are 5 soldiers. The deputy governor of the region, who's also in charge of security, said a suicide bomber targeted a security convoy near the heavily fortified international airport. Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for the latest car bomb attack. Police are currently pursuing the group and have also launched an investigation into establishing the motive behind the attack. The military group has openly attempted to overthrow the central government and impose strict interpretation of Islamic law. It's also known to carry out frequent gun and bomb attacks on security and government targets and also on civilians. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Wednesday apologized for attending a Bring Your Own Booze party at his official residence during the first COVID-19 lockdown.
Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise. I know that millions of people across this country have made extraordinary sacrifices over the last 18 months, and I know the rage they feel with me and with the government I lead when they think that in Downing Street itself, the rules are not being properly followed by the people who make the rules.
Johnson first admitted to attending the party at Downing Street in May 2020 when social gatherings were limited to a bare minimum. And now, opponents are calling for the Prime Minister to resign.
So when my constituents were making unimaginable decisions, he was hosting a boozy party in Downing Street. So how does he think he can still maintain the one rule for him and another for the rest of us? He cannot, and he must resign.
Turner says Johnson is only sorry because he had been caught. At the time of the party, rules in the UK banned meetings of more than 2 households, including meetings outdoors in gardens. U.S. online purchases during the 2021 holiday period hit a record high of $204.5 billion. According to the Digital Economy Index on Wednesday, consumer spending online increased 8.6% compared to the same time in 2020. The record spending spree during the months of November and December also included 38 days of $3 billion or more in daily spending. U.S. consumers also spent a record $855 billion online in the full year of 2021, indicating a strong growth in the digital economy. The holiday spending period from October to December represented 32% of total online annual sales in 2021. 이승재, Arirang News.
Good morning. We are in mid-January, which is the coldest time of the year here in Korea, so we are having another freeze to start. Meanwhile, heavy snow advisory is in effect in parts of Jeollado, Chungcheong, Namdo, and mountainous regions on Jeju Island today. And through tonight, the west coast of Jeollado province could see 8 more centimeters of snowfall. The rest of western regions could receive 1 to 5 centimeters. Icy winter weather will create a slippery road condition, so please drive and walk with extra care. Other than Jeju, most regions are waking up to sub-zero readings, and bright skies will be featured except for those snow-affected regions today. Then highs in Seoul will only go up to -4 degrees Celsius, Daegu, Gwangju going up to 1 degree. We could be seeing a bit of temperature improvement from tomorrow afternoon, and there will be a bit of winter precipitation this weekend. Then another blast of freezing weather returns early next week. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now. We'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Friday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
And I'm Mark Broom. We appreciate you watching us, and we'll see you at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.